Mommy didn't eat since yesterday. Can I take this bread home? The Maid's Toddler words crushed the billionaire. Daniel Hargrove had never once in his adult life looked at a clock and worried about money. Not when he was 22 and building his first tech startup out of a rented garage in Austin, Texas. Not when he was 29 and signing the papers that made him his first $100 million. And certainly not now at 38, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 42nd floor penthouse in Manhattan, watching the city below him wake up like a machine that existed solely for his benefit. The skyline was his. At least that's what it felt like. He had 4 homes: the penthouse in Manhattan, a beach house in the Hamptons, a ski chalet in Aspen, and a villa in Lake Como, Italy. He had 2 private planes and a yacht he used maybe 3 weeks out of the year. He had a driver, a personal chef, a nutritionist, a personal trainer, a stylist, and a team of 12 assistants who managed every detail of his life so efficiently that Daniel rarely had to think about anything as mundane as scheduling or grocery shopping or remembering to call his mother on her birthday. That last one, honestly, he still forgot sometimes. His company, Hargrove Technologies, had just been valued at $6.2 billion. The press called him a visionary. Magazines put his face on covers with headlines like, "The Man Who Thinks 10 Years Ahead," and "How Daniel Hargrove Rewired the Future." He had given a TED Talk that had been watched 40 million times. He had shaken hands with presidents and sat at dinner tables with kings. And yet, if you had asked anyone who truly knew Daniel Hargrove, not his business partners, not his investors, not the journalists who wrote flattering profiles, but anyone who really truly knew him, they would have told you the same thing quietly, almost sadly. Daniel Hargrove was lonely in a way that money had never been able to fix. His marriage had ended 3 years ago. No dramatic betrayal, no screaming fight, no villain in the story. Just 2 people who had slowly, quietly grown into strangers who shared a bed and a last name and very little else. His ex-wife Claire had taken their dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and moved to Portland. She sent him a Christmas card every year. He sent one back. That was the entirety of their relationship now. He had no children. That was the part that sat in his chest, sometimes like a stone he couldn't move. Not because anyone had said it was his fault, and not because he had made a deliberate choice against it, but just because life had moved the way life sometimes moves. Forward without asking your permission, without caring what you thought you'd have by now. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Daniel stood at his window with a cup of black coffee, made by his chef who arrived at 6 a.m. every day, and stared at the city below. He had a 9 o'clock board meeting, a 12:30 lunch with a senator, and a 4 o'clock call with investors in Singapore. His assistant, Marcus, had already sent him a 12-point briefing document. He hadn't read it yet. He was thinking instead about the dream he'd had last night. He couldn't remember the details anymore. Dreams slipped away from him like that, like water through his hands, but he remembered the feeling it had left behind. Something warm. Something that felt like belonging. Something that was gone the moment he opened his eyes and remembered where he was and who he was and what his day looked like. He finished his coffee. He set the cup down. He went to get ready for his meeting. It was, in almost every way, a completely ordinary morning in the life of Daniel Hargrove. That was about to change. The cleaning staff arrived at 7:30 every Tuesday and Friday. There were 3 of them, a rotating team from a professional service his building management company hired and managed. Daniel barely interacted with them. Not out of cruelty or arrogance, or at least, he told himself it wasn't that. It was just that his schedule was packed, and he was usually deep in calls or emails by the time they arrived. And it seemed simpler for everyone if they just did their work and he did his and they existed in the same space without bothering each other. He knew one of their names. Maria. He knew it because Marcus had mentioned it once when there'd been some scheduling confusion, and it had stuck in his mind for no particular reason. Maria. That was the extent of his knowledge of the people who cleaned his home every week. On this Tuesday, Something was different from the moment the elevator doors opened into his penthouse foyer. He heard a sound he almost didn't recognize at first, because it had been so long since he'd heard it in a personal space. Child's voice. Quiet. A little hesitant. The kind of voice that belongs to a person who is very young and very unsure whether they are allowed to take up space. Daniel paused in the hallway outside his home office. He frowned slightly, not in anger, just in surprise. He tilted his head the way people do when they're trying to identify a sound that doesn't match their expectations. He walked toward the kitchen. And that's when he saw her. She was tiny, 3 years old, though he didn't know that yet, sitting very carefully on the edge of the kitchen floor with her little legs folded under her. She had dark curly hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, the kind that a tired mother does in the early morning with shaking hands and no mirror. She was wearing a purple corduroy jacket that was just slightly too small for her, the sleeves ending just above her small brown wrists. On her feet were sneakers with little cartoon flowers on them. One of them was on the wrong foot. She was holding a small stuffed rabbit against her chest with both arms, the way children hold things they love and are afraid of losing. She wasn't crying. She wasn't making a mess. She wasn't doing anything except sitting very, very still, watching her mother work. And her mother, Maria, Daniel now confirmed because her name was on the lanyard around her neck, was on the other side of the kitchen, cleaning the stovetop with her back to her daughter, moving with the quiet and careful efficiency of someone who is trying very hard to do their job well while being terrified of being noticed. The little girl looked up. She found Daniel's eyes. And she didn't look away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Daniel Hargrove, the man who had addressed boardrooms of 200 people without flinching, who had done live television interviews without notes, who had once negotiated a $200 million acquisition deal across a table of 12 hostile lawyers without breaking a sweat, stood completely still in his own kitchen doorway, staring at a 3-year-old girl who was staring right back at him. She had enormous dark eyes. The kind that picked up all the light in the room and held it. There was no fear in them, which surprised him. Most adults showed at least some degree of nervousness around Daniel. He had been told more than once that he had an imposing presence, which was a polite way of saying that his height and his silence and the way he occupied space made people want to straighten their backs and choose their words carefully. But this little girl looked at him the way children sometimes look at things they find genuinely interesting. Like he was a large bird she hadn't seen before. Curious. Completely without agenda. Then she smiled. It was the smallest, most cautious smile. Just a tiny upturn at the corners of her mouth, like she was testing whether smiling was allowed in this place. Daniel didn't smile back. Not right away. He was too surprised to smile. He just stood there, holding his phone in one hand, feeling something strange and unnameable shifting in his chest. Behind the little girl, Maria turned. The moment she saw Daniel, the color drained from her face. She was a woman in her early 30s, with the same dark curly hair as her daughter, though hers was pulled tightly back into a bun, practical and no nonsense. She had kind eyes and a face that looked like it had been through a great deal and had come out the other side still fundamentally decent, still fundamentally warm, though tired in a way that went deeper than just one bad night's sleep. It was the tiredness of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had simply gotten used to the weight. Mr. Hargrove. Her voice was steady but just barely. I am so sorry. I know she is not supposed to be here. My babysitter canceled this morning at the last minute and I did not have anyone, and I could not miss today because I already had to reschedule last week when she was sick, and She was already moving toward her daughter, putting herself slightly between the little girl and Daniel in the instinctive way mothers do. I will make sure she is quiet. She will not touch anything. I'm so sorry. Please, It's okay, Daniel said. Maria stopped talking. She blinked at him. It's okay, he said again, because he could see from her face that she hadn't quite processed it the first time. I'm not upset. She exhaled, but she still looked unsure. The way people look when they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. When you have spent enough of your life in situations where kindness arrives and then gets yanked away, you learn not to fully believe in it until it proves itself. What's her name? Daniel asked. Maria blinked again. Sophia. Daniel looked down at the little girl, Sophia, who was still watching him with those enormous lamplit eyes and that cautious almost smile. Hi, Sophia, he said. Hi, she said back. Her voice was the size of a thimble. He almost smiled then. Almost. He looked back at Maria. She can stay. Just let her sit somewhere comfortable, away from any cleaning supplies. Maybe the living room. There's a couch. Thank you, Maria whispered. It came out rough, like the words had scraped against something raw on the way up. Thank you very much. Daniel nodded and went back to his office, and told himself he had a board meeting to prepare for. He sat down at his desk. He opened the 12-point briefing document Marcus had sent him. He read the same sentence 4 times without understanding it. From the living room, he could hear the tiny sound of Sophia talking softly to her stuffed rabbit, holding a whole private conversation with it in the most serious and important tone, the way very small children do when they are absolutely convinced the world they have created is just as real as the one everyone else is living in. He closed the document. He opened it again. He could not concentrate. 40 minutes later, Daniel got up from his desk to refill his coffee. He told himself that was the only reason he was walking toward the kitchen. Coffee. That was it. He passed through the living room. Sophia was sitting in the middle of his enormous cream-colored couch, the one that had cost $14,000 and had been selected by his interior designer because it was architecturally pure and created a sense of restrained luxury. She looked very small on it. She had taken off her purple jacket because the penthouse was warm and folded it neatly beside her, or tried to fold it anyway, which for a 3-year-old meant it was sort of bunched into a little pile that she had patted flat with both hands and seemed very proud of. Her rabbit was propped up against the arm of the couch. She had apparently decided it needed a rest. On the glass coffee table in front of her, the one that was always empty and polished to a mirror shine, because Daniel had no decorative objects in his living room because he had never had a reason to acquire any, Sophia had arranged a small collection of things from her jacket pocket. Pink hair tie, button, a small folded piece of paper, a single AA battery, a plastic ring with a purple gem that was slightly melted on one side. She was looking at these things with the focused gravity of a museum curator arranging an exhibit. She looked up when she noticed Daniel in the doorway. I made a collection, she told him very seriously. I see that, he said. This is a power ring, she said, holding up the melted plastic ring. It doesn't have much power left because it got too hot. But it still has some. That's good to know, Daniel said. You can sit down, Sophia told him, in the exact tone that a person uses when they are being gracious and generous about sharing a space that they have claimed as their own. He sat down, on the opposite end of the couch because it felt right to leave space. What's that? He asked, nodding at the folded piece of paper. Sophia picked it up, unfolded it with great care. It was a drawing, crayon on-line notebook paper, the kind torn from a school composition book, of 2 figures. One was tall, with what appeared to be a large circular head and lines radiating from it like a sun. The other was very small, holding the tall figure's hand. That's me and Mommy, Sophia said. I can see that, Daniel said. And he could actually. Sophia looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she folded it back up very carefully, and placed it in the center of her collection like it was the most valuable thing in it. 'Cause it was. It happened just before noon. Maria had moved through the penthouse with quiet efficiency. The bathrooms, the bedroom, the hallway, the study. She worked the way Daniel had noticed she always worked, on the rare occasions he had been in the same room during the cleaning. Methodically, thoroughly, without wasted movement. She was good at her job. Really good. The kind of good that comes not from training alone but from a deep personal investment in doing things properly, Even when, maybe especially when, nobody is watching. Sophia had stayed on the couch for most of the morning, which Daniel found remarkable for a child that age. She had talked to her rabbit. She had rearranged her collection 3 times. She had fallen into a brief, drooping nap around 10, curling herself into the corner of the couch cushions with her jacket pulled over her like a blanket, and she had slept for 45 minutes with her mouth slightly open and her little chest rising and falling, looking so entirely peaceful and so entirely small that Daniel, who had walked through the living room to get water, had stopped and looked at her for a long moment before continuing to the kitchen. He hadn't understood the feeling the sight gave him. He hadn't tried to name it. He had just noted it, something like ache, something like warmth, something in between, and moved on. Just before noon, Sophia woke up. She woke up the way small children do, suddenly and completely, sitting up straight and blinking with the expression of someone who requires a moment to reconstruct the facts of the world. Then she seemed to remember where she was, and her eyes moved around the room, and found her rabbit, and relaxed. Then her stomach growled. It was a small sound, but the penthouse was quiet and Daniel was sitting in the armchair across the room. He had, without quite deciding to, gradually migrated from his office to the living room over the course of the morning, and he heard it clearly. Sophia looked down at her stomach with an expression of mild betrayal. Then she looked at Daniel. "I'm a little hungry," she said, in the tone of someone making a formal disclosure. "Okay," Daniel said. "What do you like to eat?" She considered this with genuine gravity. "Cheese. And crackers. And sometimes yogurt. And bread. I really like bread." "I think I have all of those things," Daniel said. He went to the kitchen. His chef had stocked everything before leaving. There were several kinds of cheese in the refrigerator, a full loaf of fresh sourdough bread on the counter, crackers in the pantry, and an assortment of yogurts. Daniel stared at all of it for a second, having the strange experience of making a snack for a child in his kitchen for the first time in his life. He put together a small plate. Cheese slices, crackers, a piece of sourdough bread torn from the loaf. He found a small bunch of grapes and added those too. He poured a glass of apple juice, because there was apple juice in the refrigerator for reasons he'd never questioned. His chef always stocked it and he'd never asked why. He carried it to the living room and set it on the coffee table in front of Sophia, gently moving her collection to the side to make room. Sophia stared at the plate with wide eyes. "Thank you," she breathed. She ate with the focused appreciation of a person who understands, even at the age of 3, that food is not nothing. She didn't grab. She didn't rush. She ate one thing at a time, neatly and carefully, and she said for the bread, which made Daniel look up from the report he was pretending to read. For a few minutes, they sat in a comfortable and entirely strange silence, the 38-year-old billionaire and the 3-year-old girl, while Sophia worked through her snack and Daniel pretended to work. Then Sophia picked up the remaining piece of bread. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time in a way that went beyond just regular looking. Daniel noticed. "You can eat it," he said. "It's yours." Sophia shook her head slowly. "What's wrong?" he asked. Sophia turned the piece of bread over in her small hands. She looked up at him, and there was something in her face that didn't belong there. Something too heavy, too old, too worn for a 3-year-old's features. Something that had come from watching the world more carefully than 3-year-olds should ever have to. "Can I take this home?" she asked. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. "Sure. But why?" "You can have more here if you want." Sophia looked at the bread again. Then she looked at Daniel, and her enormous eyes were completely steady and completely serious and completely honest in the way that only very young children's eyes ever are. "Because," she said quietly, "Mommy didn't eat since yesterday." The room went absolutely silent. Daniel Hargrove, who had negotiated with kings, who had built a billion-dollar empire, who had stood at windows watching cities like they belonged to him, felt those 7 words hit him somewhere in his chest like a physical thing. Like a door he didn't know was closed had just been blown open. "What?" he asked. His voice came out different than usual. Muller. Mommy says she's not hungry, Sophia said, with the knowing look of a child who has heard this particular sentence too many times and has started to understand that it doesn't always mean what it says. But I think she is. I think she's just saving it. Saving what? Daniel asked, though he already knew. He already felt the weight of the answer coming before it arrived. The food, Sophia said simply. She shrugged one small shoulder, the way children shrug when they are reporting a fact they have simply accepted about the world. She saves it for me. She always saves it for me. She held out the piece of bread, offering it to him to look at like it was evidence. So can I take this home for her? Sophia asked. So she can eat tonight. Please. Daniel sat with Sophia's words for a long moment. The piece of bread was still in her small hands. She was still holding it out toward him slightly, still waiting for his answer with a patient, serious expression of a child making a very important request. Can I take this home for her, so she can eat tonight? He could not speak, which was not a thing that happened to Daniel Hargrove. He always had words. He had built his entire career, his entire public identity, on the ability to speak, clearly, compellingly, confidently, in any situation. But right now, with a 3-year-old holding a piece of bread and looking at him with those enormous, honest eyes, he had nothing. Yes, he finally said. Of course you can. Sophia nodded, satisfied, and tucked the bread very carefully into the pocket of her purple jacket. Daniel stood up. He walked to the kitchen doorway and looked in. Maria was cleaning the sink, her back to him, moving with that same quiet efficiency. But now, with Sophia's words ringing in his ears, he saw it differently. He saw the too thin line of her shoulders. He saw the careful economy of her movements, nothing wasted, nothing extra. He saw the way her shirt was just slightly worn at the collar in a way that a woman who was doing well financially would have replaced months ago. He saw all of it. And he understood with a clarity that felt like cold water on the face, that he had been sharing a space with this woman every Tuesday and Friday for. He tried to remember, almost 2 years. 2 years. And he had never, not once, asked her a single question about her life. Not one. He was not a cruel man. He had never thought of himself as cruel. He donated to charities. Significant amounts, actually, and he didn't publicize it, which he considered a point of personal integrity. He paid his full staff generously. He had a reputation in his industry for being demanding but fair. But kindness and fairness, he was understanding in this moment, are not the same as seeing. He had never seen Maria. She had been there in his home every week for 2 years, and he had never once actually looked at her. He knocked gently on the kitchen doorframe. Maria turned. When she saw his face, which must have been showing something unfamiliar, because she looked immediately worried, she put down her cloth and straightened up. Is something wrong? Did Sophia? Nothing's wrong, Daniel said. He paused. He was not entirely sure how to do this. He was not a man who had many conversations about anything personal. His world was transactions and strategy and forward motion. He wasn't sure he had the language for this kind of conversation, but he tried. Sophia said something. And I wanted to ask you. Maria's eyes went quickly to the living room, where Sophia was visible through the doorway, rearranging her collection again. Her expression shifted, the particular helpless, private look of a parent realizing that their child has said something true that they weren't ready to have said. She said you haven't eaten since yesterday, Daniel said, and kept his voice as gentle as he could. She wanted to take bread home for you. A long silence. Maria looked down at the kitchen counter. She worries, Maria said finally. Her voice was controlled, but it had an edge to it, the kind that comes from holding something in for a very long time. She is 3 and she already worries. I hate that she worries. I know, Daniel said, though he didn't, not really, not in the way Maria did. But I'm asking because, Will you please let me help? Maria looked up. Her jaw was set in the way of someone who has survived by not asking for things. Who has learned, through experience, that accepting help can sometimes come with prices that are worse than the problems they solve. She looked at him with careful, measuring eyes. Not unfriendly but not open. The look of someone who has been burned enough times to approach warmth with caution. I'm fine, she said. Maria. He said her name not to be authoritative, but to be honest. To be present in the way he had not been for 2 years. Please. Tell me what's happening. Another silence. Longer this time. And then, something in her face gave way. Not dramatically. Not in a flood of tears. Just a very quiet, very controlled loosening of the armor that she wore. The kind of release that happens when a person has been strong for so long that they have almost forgotten what it feels like to put the weight down. My hours were cut, she said. 3 months ago. The company lost 2 contracts and they cut hours across the whole team. I went from 5 days to 3. And the rent. She stopped. Started again. The rent in my building was increased. And my daughter's daycare raised their rates. And I tried to manage it. Her voice stayed steady. I am still trying to manage it. I have a second job on weekends, waitressing. But last week my car broke down and the repair cost everything I had saved, and this week has been. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Daniel looked at this woman, 30-something, strong, clearly intelligent, clearly proud, and saw, fully and completely for the first time, what it looked like to be someone who was working with everything they had and still being slowly overwhelmed. Not through laziness or bad choices, but through the simple, merciless arithmetic of a life where every cost was going up and every income source was being cut. Why didn't you say something? He asked. He didn't mean it as a criticism. It came out like a genuine question, a confused one. The question of a man who was only now realizing how small his world had been. Maria gave him a look that contained an entire education. Mr. Hargrove, she said quietly, when was the last time you asked? He had no answer. 'Cause she was right. He had never asked. From the living room, Sophia's small voice drifted in, explaining something about her collection to her rabbit in complete seriousness. And something happened to Daniel Hargrove in that kitchen, in the silence after Maria's question, that no boardroom had ever been able to do to him. He felt ashamed. Not the public kind of shame, not the kind you feel when you make a mistake in front of an audience. The private kind, the deep kind, the kind that comes from looking at yourself honestly and seeing the gap between who you thought you were and who you had actually been. He had been building a life so focused on scale, billions, thousands of employees, global impact, the future of technology, that he had managed to completely miss the woman who cleaned his kitchen every week. The woman whose daughter had been quietly saving bread. He had missed all of it. He was done missing it. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. His kitchen table that he never sat at, that his chef used as a prep surface and that was otherwise ornamental, and he sat down. Tell me everything, he said. Please. Start from the beginning. Maria told him. She stood at first, holding her cleaning cloth in her hands like she wasn't quite sure she was allowed to just be a person in this kitchen, like she needed the cloth to justify her presence. But Daniel asked her to sit down, and eventually, slowly, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat. She told him about the hours being cut. She told him about the rent increase. $140 a month, which doesn't sound enormous until you hear the number against the background of everything else. She told him about the daycare costs and the weekend waitressing job and the car repair. She told him about the way she rationed food at the end of each month, making sure Sophia's plate was always full, making sure Sophia never, not once, felt the weight of it, and absorbing whatever was left herself. She told him that Sophia didn't know. Or she hadn't thought Sophia knew. That was the part that clearly hurt her most. The idea that her 3-year-old daughter had been watching and understanding and quietly carrying a worry that a 3-year-old should never carry. She notices everything, Maria said, and there was a helpless love in her voice that was so pure and so tired at the same time. She is 3 years old and she notices everything. I try so hard to make sure she doesn't see. But she sees. She loves you very much, Daniel said. I know, Maria said. And for the first time her eyes went bright. Not crying, she didn't cry, not there, not in front of him, and Daniel understood that this was its own kind of strength, but bright, full. The eyes of a mother looking at the fact of her child's love and being simultaneously destroyed and rebuilt by it. She told me your hair was pretty, Maria said almost to herself, and then laughed slightly, surprised by her own sentence. This morning when we were getting ready, she said, I wonder if the man in the big apartment has pretty hair like Mommy. I don't know why. I think she was nervous to come here. She was trying to make it into an adventure. Daniel found himself laughing too, quietly, for the first time that day. Maybe for the first time in a while, actually. The real kind of laugh, not the social kind. She told me my couch had sitting powers, he said. Maria pressed her hand briefly over her mouth, holding back a smile. She says things like that. I don't know where she gets it. She's extraordinary, Daniel said. And he meant it with his whole chest. The word hung in the air between them. Maria looked at him for a moment, and whatever remaining wariness she had held on to seemed to settle, quietly, like dust after a long disturbance. Daniel acted that afternoon. Not in the dramatic, grand gesture way that people imagine billionaires act when they decide to do something. Not with a press release or a photo opportunity. Quietly and specifically, and with the intention of treating Maria like a person whose problems deserved real solutions rather than the kind of charity that makes the giver feel good and solves nothing permanently. He called Marcus first. He had Marcus look into the cleaning company's contract, and he arranged, through the company properly and professionally, for Maria's hours to return to 5 days a week and her rate to be increased by 30%. He didn't tell Maria it was coming from him. He just made sure it happened. He called his real estate attorney and asked about the building Maria lived in. Her landlord, it turned out, owned several buildings in the borough. A man Daniel had met at an event several years ago and had never particularly liked. He made 2 phone calls. The rent increase was quietly reversed. He made a call to the daycare too, and established an account there under a family assistance fund that his company's foundation ran, and that, coincidentally, had been underfunded and underused for 3 years because Daniel had never paid much attention to it. Sophia's care was covered for the next 2 years. And then he went to the living room. Sophia was still on the couch. She had been very patiently putting her rabbit through what appeared to be an elaborate imaginary checkup, pressing her ear to its tummy and making very serious diagnostic sounds. Sophia, Daniel said. She looked up. Are you hungry for lunch? She considered. Yes, but I saved the bread. For Mommy. I know, Daniel said. But your Mommy is in the kitchen right now. And I was thinking the 3 of us could have lunch together if that's okay with you. Have bread. And I have soup. And your mom can eat right here. Sophia's face went through a sequence of emotions that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. Surprise, then a careful hope, then a joy so bright and so total that it looked almost like relief. Like she had been holding something tight in both hands for a long time and was finally being told she could put it down. Mommy can eat here, she asked. Right here, he said. At the table. Sophia looked at her rabbit. She looked back at Daniel. Okay, she said, with the gravity of someone accepting an extremely important invitation. I will come. The 3 of them sat at Daniel's kitchen table, the one he never used, and they had lunch. His chef had gone for the day, so Daniel made it himself, which was a moderately humbling experience since his cooking skills were limited. He heated canned tomato soup. Good canned soup, the expensive kind, but still. He made grilled cheese sandwiches. He did this slowly and carefully and with the focus of a man who was determined to do one humble domestic thing correctly, and the result was imperfect in various minor ways, but Sophia declared her sandwich the best one with complete authority and no apparent irony, and Maria ate, really ate, leaning over her bowl with both hands around it. And the kitchen was warm, and the soup smelled like something from a long time ago and something deeply good. Sophia sat between them. She talked because Sophia always talked. She told Daniel about her rabbit's name, which was Gerald. She told him about her best friend at daycare, whose name was Emma and who had recently done something with a crayon that Sophia found both wrong and impressive. She told him that her favorite color was the purple that isn't too pink, which she seemed to feel was a very specific and important distinction. She asked Daniel if he had a rabbit. He said no. She looked at him for a moment with those enormous lamp-lit eyes. "That's okay," she said. "Gerald can be your rabbit too. If you're nice to him." "I'll do my best," Daniel said. "You have to talk to him," Sophia said seriously. "He likes when people talk to him. He gets sad if nobody talks to him." "I understand that," Daniel said. And something in his voice made Maria look up from her soup and meet his eyes, and he held her gaze for just a moment. Not romantically, not with any agenda, but with the kind of look that passes between two people who have, in a single strange and unexpected morning, actually seen each other. When it was time to go, Sophia put on her purple jacket. She retrieved Gerald from the couch and tucked him under her arm. She collected her things from the coffee table: the hair tie, the button, the folded drawing, the battery, the half-melted power ring, and distributed them back into her pockets with the careful process of a person who knows the value of things. At the elevator, she turned to Daniel. She held out her small hand. He shook it very seriously because that was clearly what was called for. "Thank you for the soup," Sophia said. "And the sandwich. And for letting Gerald sit on your couch." "Thank you for visiting," Daniel said. "You should get a plant," Sophia told him, glancing back at his penthouse with a thoughtful expression. "It would make it less quiet." Then the elevator doors opened, and Maria took Sophia's hand, and they stepped in. Just before the doors closed, Sophia lifted the little piece of bread from her pocket, the one she had saved for her mother, and looked at it. Then she looked at her mother. Then she smiled, the full smile, the real one, the one without any caution in it at all, and tucked it back into her pocket to save for later, because maybe. Her small face seemed to say, maybe today everything is going to be okay. The doors closed. Daniel stood in his foyer for a long time. Then he went and stood at his window, the way he did every morning. The city was the same. The skyline was the same. The streets below were full of the same people moving through the same Tuesday. But something in the way he saw it had changed completely. There were people down there. Actual people. With children and bread and worn jacket collars and daughters who noticed everything and saved things for later. People who had entire worlds in them that he had never thought to ask about. He had been looking at the city like he owned it. He was only just now learning how to see it. He got out his phone. He called his foundation director, a woman named Joyce who he had met with twice in 3 years and who was, he suspected, doing important work that he had been too distracted to properly support. "Joyce," he said when she picked up, sounding slightly startled to be hearing from him directly. "I want to talk about what we're doing. Really doing. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" "Of course," Joyce said. "And bring coffee," he added. "I'll make breakfast." He didn't know how to make breakfast. He was going to figure it out. Later that evening, a small drawing arrived by messenger at his building. It was in a sealed envelope with his name written on the front in the careful, oversized printing of a child who has worked very hard on their letters. He opened it. It was a crayon drawing on lined notebook paper. 3 figures this time instead of 2. One very tall figure with long lines radiating from its circular head. One medium figure standing straight. And one very small figure right in the middle. All 3 were holding hands. At the bottom, in adult handwriting, Maria's neat and careful, were 4 words. "Thank you for seeing." Daniel sat down at his kitchen table, the one he was already starting to think of as the one where things happened, and he held the drawing for a long time. Then he got up and found a magnet in a kitchen drawer he had never opened before. He put the drawing on the refrigerator. It was the first thing he had ever put on his refrigerator. It looked, he thought, like a beginning. Sometimes the biggest lives are changed by the smallest voices. And sometimes a piece of bread, saved in a tiny pocket by a child who loves her mother, is worth more than everything in the world.